All right, good morning, everybody. So thank you for joining us to our second session here in the Inclusion by Instinct series. We're talking about the financial impact of diversity, equity, inclusion for small businesses. And this is the second session in our 5-part series, and we are excited to be focusing on the LGBTQ plus community this morning. So we have a great panel of speakers who's going to be talking about their experience and sharing a lot of great information with us on today, October 11th, which is also National Coming Out Day. So an important day for the LGBTQ community. So my name is Megan Beckley. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I'm the executive director for the Berea, Olmsted, and Beechwood Chambers of Commerce, and also help oversee the Collaborative Chambers Alliance, which is 20 chambers around Cuyahoga County that work together to put programming such as this together. So we're excited to have you all here today. I know we have a couple of locations that are live streaming for us. So thank you for being here. We appreciate you very much. Before we get started, I wanted to just say a quick thank you to our sponsors, Baldwin Wallace and Cuyahoga Community College. Thank you to them for their support. We were able to make this series free and open to everyone thanks to their support. So we appreciate them very much. With that, I want to go ahead and dive right into it and turn it over to our panelists to begin introducing themselves so that y'all can hear who is going to be speaking with you today. So instead of reading their bios for them, I figured I would let them introduce themselves so you can see who's in the room with you. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Amanda Cole and let her introduce herself so we can kick things off. So Amanda, I'll turn it over to you.
Good morning. Thanks, Megan. Thanks for having us. And thanks again for all the support to make this possible. It's really wonderful to be in this room with everyone. My name is Amanda Cole and my pronouns are she, her. I'm the executive director of Plexus, which is the LGBT and Allied Chamber of Commerce. We're up here in Northeast Ohio, but we really work to serve everyone and everywhere where we might have our members. And we currently have folks located, businesses and individuals in over 64 counties, cities, municipalities here in Ohio. My background is actually in nonprofits. I worked in higher education and in arts and culture. So for those of you joining us from a nonprofit lens, trust me, this is applicable. Even though we're talking about it from a small business standpoint, we're really talking about organizational culture. And then of course, as a Chamber of Commerce, I get to work to support small businesses that are LGBT owned, growing allyship in the small business area. And then also we work with corporations on their diversity, equity, and inclusion, and then individuals with professional development and networking and connection opportunities.
Awesome, thank you. All right, let's turn it over to Tim Marshall.
Good morning. Thanks, Megan, and happy Coming Out Day, everybody. It's nice to see you. My name is Tim Marshall, and at present, I am a marketing consultant and professor of marketing at Baldwin Wallace University in the Carmel Boyer School of Business. My work with small businesses is pretty extensive. As a consultant off campus, I engage with small businesses and nonprofits, but at BW, I direct our Digital Marketing Center, which is a student-powered, professionally led agency, and we specialize in helping small to medium-sized businesses, family-owned businesses, and nonprofits with both their digital presence and a strategy. A long time ago, in terms of working within the LGBT community, I may or may not have been the Director of Marketing and Communications at the LGBT Center of Greater Cleveland. So I'm a big fan of the center, although that was a really long time ago at this point. Really happy to be here today. In my consulting work, we do talk about establishing a culture where a business can live its brand. And if a business has a brand that's about inclusion, it's a lot more than just making that rainbow logo go live on June 1 and taking it down on July 1st. So happy to be here today to talk about these issues. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. All right, and let's go over to David Robinson. You want to say hello, David?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. My name is David Robinson. Really excited to be here this morning. Megan, thank you for hosting this and working to put on such a great series for so many people to access. I am the Director of Events and Engagement for University Circle Incorporated on the east side of Cleveland. I've been working at UCI for a little over 7 years now, almost 8. And primarily I oversee our public engagement and our business engagement. And so that includes a lot of business services. We operate a pseudo Chamber of Commerce called the Greater Circle Business Alliance. We also have quite a few business engagement educational series that help support small business owners, either through financing, marketing, other resources like that. Prior to my time at UCI, I was also in a consulting world for a bit. I did some consulting work with COSI, the Greater Cleveland Partnership, the YWCA, Breakthrough Charter Schools, Plexus, many years before we landed Amanda and could secure an executive director. But I have been working with businesses and communities for really the past 15 years. And really trying to find that intersection between how businesses can support their community and vice versa.
Great, thank you so much. All right, so before we dive into our actual panel questions here, just a couple of things. First, I'm hoping our fourth panelist, Chanel Johnson, I'm hoping she'll be able to join us. She's the Senior Deal Flow Associate at Jumpstart, which is a nonprofit here in Northeast Ohio working to help small businesses and launch entrepreneurs. So hopefully she'll be able to join us here before we get too deep into our conversation. But if not, we still have an amazing panel of speakers here this morning with a wealth of knowledge. So we'll go ahead and dive into our questions. But I do want to mention, if you have any questions as we go along, please feel free to use the Q&A function. If you want to drop something in the chat, you're welcome to. If you'd like to ask something anonymously, please feel free to go ahead and just send a message directly to myself as the host, and I can ask that on your behalf. If you don't want to, have folks see your name or anything like that, I won't say who's asking it. So please feel free to do that. Just send a chat directly to me, and I will, again, I'm happy to ask on your behalf for our panelists. So with that, let's go ahead and dive into our conversation for today. So first, I think before we get too deep into a lot of the content around small businesses and business ownership and working with capturing the LGBTQ community as your customer base, I wanted to see if we could set a little bit of a framework here with some of the language and terminology that is associated with the LGBTQ plus community, and just a little bit of a synopsis about the community itself. So with that, let's kick things off with some language and terminology. So what are some of the terms that, kind of regarding the queer community that people want to know or need to know before we get too deep into the conversation? So Amanda, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, well, let's start with the word queer, right? So the word queer, for somebody like me, I'm queer identified, I also identify as a lesbian. It's a really embracing term. So for me, it's like an umbrella term. And to me, it kind of just opens it up and people know what I mean. And it really often goes well with the word queer community. But the word queer is still a derogatory term. And for some of us, it's been something that's been yelled at us, said to us, and it's the last maybe thing that we heard from our family after we came out. So it can be a little bit difficult to use at times. Even in the LGBTQ community, some of us really like the word and some of us don't. So here's what I do around that. The word queer is really positive for me. But when I'm engaging with somebody else who's a member of the LGBTQ community and they say things like, oh, Amanda, I don't like that word. Here's why. Okay, I meet them where they are and I treat them how they want to be treated. So I don't use that word less for me or feel shame or guilt about it. But when I'm with them, I'm going to say LGBTQ community. So for our allies, this can be tricky, but it's also changing in the landscape. So when I'm listening to NPR and I'm hearing the journalists and reporters talk about queer community, I know that we're starting to see a shift of a greater embrace of this term. But if you're uncomfortable with it, especially as a straight ally, use LGBTQ instead, because you don't want to say a word and it come off awkward and then somebody think that you actually just have a problem with LGBTQ people. But again, queer is this like umbrella kind of term. But everything that we're talking about when we're talking about the language, the identities and terms within the LGBTQ community is we're talking about sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression. And we often shorten that into SOGI, right? Sounds really great. So here's the thing. We all have a sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression. Every single person here does. You might not think about it because maybe if you identify as straight, you've received messages that that's the norm, or you see yourself reflected in stories more often than not. Again, this is something that's changing. But for us in the LGBTQ community, maybe we have a greater sense or awareness of this awareness of our orientation or our gender identity, because it goes against the norm in some ways, but everybody has them. When we're talking about gender identity and expression, gender identity it's a psychological, emotional, spiritual development of how you identify, how masculine, how feminine you identify. Many times, the way that we know or share somebody's gender in conversation is using pronouns like he and she. That's why many of us are introducing ourselves increasingly using our pronouns. Because the thing is, you look at me and how I'm dressed, and you're going to say, oh, Amanda, she, because you're making an assumption, but you're getting it right. You're making a guess and you're getting it right because I have certain hairstyle or earrings or whatever. But I can be this feminine and use they, them pronouns, a totally gender neutral pronoun. I could be this feminine and my name be Amanda, and I could use he, him pronouns because my gender identity is internal and it's personal to me. Now, how we express all of this, with regards to masculinity and femininity, that's that expression part. Oh, okay, deep breath there. This is like a 2-hour kind of training and conversation. So we're just trying to do like a quick overview on that. But again, this is why we use pronouns in our signature lines, or we share them here so we can slow down and not make an assumption. And again, the most popular or most commonly known gender neutral term is they, them. But say I was on this call with Megan and she didn't have her pronouns in her Zoom. And I really like something that Megan said, but I don't want to assume their pronouns. So I'm going to say, I really want to go back to what they said, right? Can we circle back and let's see what that person has to say. So if I'm in a group meeting or in a different kind of setting, I can also use they, them to not have to make an assumption just based on how somebody looks. I can use their name and I can use they, them. All right. So then we have orientation. That's external. How do I build relationships, whether those are physical or emotional relationships? How am I oriented to the outside world, right? So I'm in same gender loving relationships. Only one, right? Only one. I'm married, just one. But then again, there's nothing wrong with polyamory. Some people have multiple relationships, right? So that's another part of this. But we got lesbian, gay, bi, pansexual, asexual. These are some of the many different orientations. When we think about sexuality, rather than just straight or gay, what we want to think about is that it's a galaxy, right? There's a lot of different ways that people can form these relationships and have these meaningful partnerships for them, right? And then another thing that we hear is, what do you say? Do you say LGBT, LGBTQ+, LGBTQIA? The best way to go is to say LGBTQ because you're kind of getting everybody in there. The I stands for intersex. And here's a fact. If you know somebody or you are a redhead, genetically a redhead, it's just as likely that you know somebody or could be an intersex person. So intersex, in a really quick roundabout way, is that even on a biological level, physiological level, sex, reproductive organs, hormones, chromosomes, X's and Y's, and how they get put together is actually much more of a spectrum. It's not on this binary. So just like orientation is on a spectrum, it might change for somebody over time, and our gender identity evolves and grows over time. So too is our physical manifestation. And so intersex people are just outside of what we typically label as male or female, right? And then asexual folks form partnerships and those orientation, those intimate partner relationships in ways that include physical touch and relationships, sexual desire and intimacy in ways that are different or might not. They might have a romantic relationship, romantic feelings, but they might navigate that interpersonal relationship in a different way. Okay, so I spoke really quickly. I hope I didn't leave anybody in the wake there. And again, that's an overview. So especially with things with regards to that are not a part of my identity, I want to be aware that other people experience that differently. So lastly, I'm cisgender. So that means that at birth, I was assigned female. And then as I developed my identity development around how I identify, I was like, yeah, I'm a girl, right? I mean, it doesn't just go like that. You know, coming out isn't just like a one-time billboard that we take out and everybody knows. So it was a development. So I'm cisgender. And so for somebody who's transgender, They might have been assigned, say, female at birth, but as they developed their sense of self and what felt best for them internally and how to express themselves, say they identified as a boy, well, that would make them a transgender man. So cisgender means I was assigned female at birth, and then cis means on the same side of. So that gender identity aligned, it's on the same side. For a transgender person, it's trans, literally Latin root, opposite side of. And so that process then of transitioning is often lifelong. It's not just a one and done. And it can include a lot of things: changing name, changing outward appearance, changing pronouns, maybe different affirming care with regards to medical and healthcare interventions that they might seek. Some are one time and some are lifelong. But what that is all about is reconciling and affirming what somebody internally already knows and presenting to that to the outside world. So for many times for transgender people, they have their own internal sense of self that could be on its own timeline differently than how long they've been telling us, right, that they are transgender. And the last thing, some transgender people, they introduce and they tell you, I'm a trans man, I'm a trans woman. For other people, they don't, and they don't have to. They don't have to tell you that they're transgender, right? For some people, it's an important part of their identities, and for others, it's not. So as we are allies, right? As a cisgender person, I'm an ally. As a white person, I'm an ally within the LGBTQ community. As an able-bodied person, right? All these ways I too have allyship. I have to pay attention to my transgender friends and know I have some friends that they're like, I'm a man, Amanda, right? I'm a man, because they are. They also are a transgender man, but that's not how they introduce themselves. So I keep that to myself. It's not a part of the introduction. It's not a part of the information that I share. Other people, it's really important that people know that they're a transgender woman. So when I introduce them, I might include that. I might include that in their bio, or let people know, yeah, Erica, I'm going to refer you to her. She's a trans woman. She can talk to you more about that. She brings a really great perspective, right? So I think that's it. And I want to see if anybody else has something else to say, or Megan, if I missed anything.
That was a lot of information to squeeze into a very short window of time. So thank you for synopsizing that so well. But yes, before I go to our other panelists to see if there is other stuff that we want to touch on, David, did you have something? I was going to also let Chanel say hello as well.
I was just going to say, let's say good morning to Chanel.
Yeah. All right. Well, Chanel, we really didn't get too far, thankfully, before we had you join us here this morning, just doing a high level 101 on the language and terminology. So if you want to just say hello, introduce yourself, tell folks what your background is, your professional role, that would be great.
Good morning, everyone. I apologize for being late. My name is Chanel Johnson, she, her pronouns. I am a senior DoFlow analyst senior DoFlow associate at Jumpstart, basically a fancy term for a business advisor. So I work with small businesses. I'm also a board member of Plexus, and I am excited to be here.
Great, thank you. All right, anything else on language and terminology and 101 level stuff that Amanda didn't cover in her very robust and yet very succinct overview? No? All right, cool. Okay, well, before we go into our next section here, I do want to recognize that today, October 11th, is National Coming Out Day, which is an important day of the year for the LGBTQ plus community. So I wonder if we could talk a little bit about what that means. So Tim, I'll start with you. If you want to share a little bit about what today means for the community, or, for anyone personally, but not even sure a lot of folks realize that today is National Coming Out Day. So I'll start with you, Tim.
I always look at National Coming Out Day as an opportunity to tell your story again. And that's important because you're constantly coming out. Like Amanda talked about there being a development in one's identity, but every time I move and have new neighbors, I'm coming out. If I were to switch jobs or a new coworker comes into the workplace, I'm coming out. You really never stop coming out. And I think it's important to look at it that way, that it's really part of our lives. So it is. I like having that day on the calendar that addresses it, that draws attention to it. I like having the events associated around with it because it helps others who aren't ready to come out yet see that there are success stories that you can come out, that it's a day to point to different resources. It's a reminder for people that don't understand why we need to come out, the importance of being out at work, for example. And studies show time and time again, as they've been recast, that being comfortable at work leads to more productivity. So a business or workplace that were to recognize coming out day for all employees would make those who maybe haven't disclosed yet, they haven't come out, they haven't broadcast the news, that much more comfortable. So I see it as a great beacon for those of us, no matter where we're at. We've come out, we haven't come out yet, and for our allies to point to as well.
Great, thank you. David, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
Tim really hit the nail on the head, so to speak. Every year on National Coming Out Day, I think that is probably the one fact that I share with my closest allies in my life. I like to remind them that coming out is a journey. It's not a single moment in time. You're constantly doing it. The only thing I'd like to add to Tim's comments is really just a reminder that in some of those situations, you're making a choice to come out. And so it's not something that just naturally happens. As someone of the LGBTQ community, in a new situation, whether it's a new career, a new community, a new church community, a new neighborhood community, whatever that might look like, I'm making the choice, is it safe to come out? Is it okay for me to be present truly as myself in this space? And so that's why Coming Out Day is really just a great moment where you can kind of exercise that with your team annually, where it doesn't have to be a pride celebration just to kind of open that door to acceptance. And it really does make a difference, especially for your employees.
Great, thank you. Chanel, do you have anything else you wanted to add?
Not really, but I will say as an ally, I think that it's very important that you are responsive and you listen and you're open to when your friends, your family members, your coworkers are coming out to you, and that you're very respectful of them in the situation because they are sharing with you something that they feel that they can open up to you and let you know. So I think it's very important.
Great, thank you. Amanda, anything else before we move on to our next topic here?
Well, to segue a little bit into like business areas too, right? There's a lot of national days and being aware of those on your calendar is great because it lets you know how you want to engage with your constituents. So I think about National Coming Out Day of like, come on in, come out, be who you are, get a slice of pizza. So there are some marketing kinds of things here. What we want to pay attention to, and Tim, you talked about this earlier too, we don't want to just see pink or rainbow washing. When I come into your facility, what kinds of things are you thinking about for me? Do you greet me at the counter and say, how can I help you? Instead of how can I help you, ma'am or sir, to make sure that you don't get that wrong? Do you have gender neutral bathrooms available in your facility and are they easy to find? As I come into and want to bring my whole self and be out in your location, what are you doing around that? And then also just thinking about it when we're interviewing, and when we're trying, or maybe we're trying to make a sales call or a client or sell a piece of real estate, we're trying to make really quick interactions and connections. And if you assume that I have a husband because you see a ring on my finger, then it's going to make it more awkward for me, right? When I say my wife and I are buying this house, for instance. So if you don't make that assumption and you leave that door more open, it's easier for me to walk through it and then just like naturally tell you who I am, right? So I think that's one thing to keep in mind. And then back to also to what David was saying, I often think about being in the Uber at 12:30 at night. And I said, my wife is going to pick me up at the airport. And the Uber driver says, well, you don't look like a lesbian. And in that moment, I just wasn't even thinking about it. I forgot to assess my situation. That's what we're doing all the time. A lot of us are. And then if on top of that, you have other identities that might be more marginalized, if you're also having to read somebody's comfort with you and your hairstyle or your skin color or your ability or your accent, and on top of that, you're part of the LGBTQ community, making it easier for us to be out and be our whole selves helps relieve some of those other pressures that people might feel when they have to negotiate spaces.
Great. Thank you. All right, so let's dive into some of the statistics on this community to help folks kind of understand sort of how many people are we talking about here. So let's think about kind of with regard to the percentage of our population, how many folks in general are LGBTQ identified, and what is the buying power of that community? So Amanda, I'm going to turn this one over to you.
Okay, so here's the thing. We are not counted well enough, especially in the United States. So on the census, when I fill that out, because I'm married, it then indicates that I'm a same gender household. So then I'm counted as a lesbian, as a member of the LGBTQ community. But on the census, it doesn't give us the check boxes, all of us, the right check boxes or open form fill to say what my orientation is and what my gender identity is, if I'm cisgender or transgender. So our numbers were not actually appropriately counted. But our best guess is that in the United States, about 8% of people identify as lesbian, gay, bi, pansexual, some orientation other than heterosexual. And of that 8%, 4% identify as bisexual. So a lot of times what we talk about is that bisexual people often get overlooked because they might be bisexual, but be in an opposite gender loving relationship, opposite gender loving appearing relationship, right? Not the loving part appearing, but the gender part appearing. So that's really important to keep in mind. And then also right now, what's really exciting is that 1% of the population has affirmed that they're transgender. That's 2 million people. So we know that orientation with regards to our identity of transgender is smaller part of that percentage, but I think it's growing and people are answering that more. So our buying power in the United States is 1.4 trillion. And again, that's estimated, right? Because if we're not counting people, you can't count my money very well. But 1.4 trillion is our buying power, 3.4 trillion globally. And again, that number is going to be off because we do have places where people can't even be comfortable being out because of pretty major repercussions.
So it's a huge, community as far as financial impact and buying power is concerned. So it's why it's really important. I'm excited to be able to present this information today, because if you as a small business owner want to capture some of those $1.3 trillion and want those folks to do business with you, we want to try to give you some tips today that you can walk away with to help present your business as one that's more affirming to that community. David, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for noticing I came off mute there. Amanda hit it right on the head with the stats. I just want to add something that a visual cue that helps me remember kind of the demographics of my community when it comes to buying power. The LGBTQ community is really like a dumbbell on a chart. So if you think of the actual earned income for many in our community, it's either very high or very low. That's kind of where the averages come in. And so I just want to, shout out, there's still marginalization within the LGBTQ community. If you are a person of color, if you are transgender, you are much more likely to be at that lower end of the earning spectrum. And so I just like to, highlight that as well. In the tourism industry, in the business analytics industry, we like to really just kind of showcase our big buying power, which is great for us as a community. It kind of speaks to that overall power of the movement. But there's still a lot of work to be done and a lot of work that we are trying to do within the community.
Great, thank you for pointing that out. Chanel or Tim, anything we're missing before we jump into our next topic? No? Okay. Great. All right, so let's start now to dive a little bit into kind of some more tangible information for small businesses and HR professionals and entrepreneurs. So let's start with kind of the cultural perspective here. So what do small businesses need to know about conducting business with the LGBTQ community, and what is important for queer identified folks from a cultural perspective? So what are some things that a business might keep in mind as they're thinking about LGBTQ individuals as their customer, from sort of a general cultural aspect of the community? So David, why don't we start with you on that one?
Sure. The first thing that really jumps out at me is the physical space. If you're a traditional business to consumer type business, if you're welcoming people into a storefront, a restaurant, whatever it might be, a retail establishment, finding those indicators that it is a welcoming and safe space really, I think, is a visual cue for many in the community to know that they can be their authentic self in that space. Some of those examples could include, changing gender markers on your bathroom. So if you have one single restroom, just make it an all gender restroom. There's nothing wrong with that. It's a very common, before pronouns became such a heated topic in society, that was how we always handled a single restroom in a open facility or an open establishment. Those obviously rainbows during Pride Month is a very typical thing that we see. There's nothing wrong with a little rainbow flag on your door. There's plenty of criticism about, especially on the corporate end of celebrating Pride, of kind of just throwing rainbows on everything and kind of calling it a day, like I did my good job. But it really is a great visual cue, especially on a more neighborhood-oriented level, on a more immediate community level. When I see either a proud member of Plexus sticker, or I support all types of families, whatever it might be, those little decals on your door, there's plenty of ways where you can subtly show your welcomeness without having to, bear a giant flag outside your door.
Great, thank you. Chanel, let's go to you. Did you have anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, so since David talked about kind of like from a physical location, I'm thinking from a e-commerce site, website. It's about, what are you posting? What are you supporting? Who are you supporting? I think it's, very important that if your target is the LGBTQ community, that you are supporting them, that you are doing things to show them that, this is a safe space for them, that, that they are welcomed, they are wanted, and that they are understood in some kind of way. You don't necessarily need to fully understand every single thing, but I do think that you should try to be understanding of it all, wrapping your arms around them, just making sure that you're being inclusive in your thought process when you're putting out the types of products that you're supporting, or the types of products you're selling, I should say. Just thinking about it all the way, your marketing, when are you supporting? Are you supporting on coming out day? It's very far from June. So, when everybody is, all Pride Month, and then you see things trickle down and they trickle off, or you don't see any other additional support, that's something that could be kind of a red flag. So just making sure that you're inclusive continuously throughout the year.
Great, thank you.
I want to add to that, if it's all right, Megan, I'm going to jump back in. And Amanda, feel free to chime in to help with the resources. It's been a while since I've consulted with businesses on human resources, but something that businesses typically do, best practices, is checking your handbook once a year. A lot of folks try to do that in January. What language are you using in your handbook? That is a kind of a very easy change where you can show support to your employees that might be of different communities, even different cultural communities. What's your EEO statement on hiring? When you post a job application, are you putting a little, statement down there at the very bottom that shows that you're a inclusive and welcoming workplace? There are plenty of little hints that can go a long way. So it's not just supporting the broader community and creating that welcoming space for a broader community. You also need to make sure you're providing that support to employees as well.
Yeah. That's great advice. I know I always, as a queer identified person, and you see sometimes in language written, and they're referring to a hypothetical person and it says he/she. It's like, just say they. So there's little things like that you could, just do a once through on your documentation to see where you could maybe, remove some of that gendered language or things like that. All right, Tim, our marketing guru, I want to go over to you to see if you have any other helpful tips you can offer with regard to the cultural perspective for the community.
I think just some nuts and bolts tactics, and they range from anything that would be public facing. So if there are staff bios on the company or organizational website, in most corporate bios, that last sentence or two speaks to the personal side, right? That so-and-so lives in Ohio City with their husband and their 2 children, blah, blah, blah. So are those inclusive? Do do we see some diversity among the staff? Do we see staff who might be in same gender loving relationships reflected in those bios as well? Your marketing messages, are you using photos that reflect female couples, male couples? Are we really seeing that there's an attempt to cater to the community by focusing on testimonials from LGBT customers as well? That's really important. I think all of there's no one catch-all solution to giving the appearance that you are a supportive organization or business. It's really the totality of all of these very small steps when you think about it, right? Doing a find and replace with your employee handbook and making sure that the marketing messages on your website, if we see people, that we see all of the people that you would want to serve. But they do add up and make a difference. LGBT consumers, you have to remember, at the end of the day, we are consumers. So we are still looking for that quality service. We are still looking for that quality products. We want that friendly customer service. We want the efficiency. We want the good price. And we're looking for this added layer of inclusion. And it's easy to overlook something very simple. A lot of businesses do go high pride in June, but what are you saying in February? What are you saying in September or August? What do you say in October when it's, not National Coming Out Day? So all of those little cues, those messages, what you're posting really add up and make a big difference.
All right, and Amanda, anything else we missed?
I'm going to piggyback on some things. So one thing that's important to keep in mind is that LGBTQ people, we're not a federally recognized class. So you can't fire me because I was raised Catholic, right? You can't fire me because I'm a cisgender woman. You can't fire me because my ability, etc., right? Race, religion, creed, ethnicity, all this. Orientation and gender identity are not specified there. So we have a Supreme Court precedent that now says you can't fire me because I'm a lesbian, and that's a statute. And we have these things, but it's not codified in law, right? So that's really important to keep in mind. And so then it goes back to the states. So the state of Ohio does not protect me from being fired in my public accommodations. And when we're talking about public accommodations, that's like when I go and apply for a loan. I could go seek to rent somewhere, and somebody can say to me, I don't rent to people like you because you're gay. Unless, so it's not at the federal level, it's not at the state level, unless I live in a place like Cuyahoga County or Medina or Kent, where they've passed anti-discrimination ordinances. This is the kind of patchwork of protections that we have. So you putting that statement there just makes it easier for me as a consumer and as an employer, as a potential employee, to know that you're doing some of the work. That's really important. Also, if you have vendors you're able to work with, diversify your vendors, right? How are you working with women-owned, veteran-owned, minority-owned, and LGBT-owned businesses? And there's a lot of different business resource supports like Jumpstart, we have the Women Business Center, Hispanic Business Center, right? The President's Council, Plexus. We're all working in these spaces of trying to help bring us as business owners, consumers, and professionals out from the margins into the center so you can find us, engage with us, and spend with us. So that's another important thing to keep in mind.
Great, thank you.
Amanda, why don't you talk, sorry to hijack here, why don't you talk about LGBT certification? I just realized many people on this call might not realize that there is an opportunity to actually become a certified business if you identify as queer.
Right, so if you are any of those minority identities, right? The thing is that women, veteran, minority, and LGBT-owned businesses, we're not making up the majority. And so when we have that designation and we have that certification, it helps to identify and give us opportunities. So if you're an LGBT-owned business, we're a part of that because we're part of the NGLCC, the National LGBT Chamber. Chanel Johnson is actually our supplier diversity chair. And Chanel's done a lot of work in this area with what regards to certification is and how we do that. So it just can open up opportunities for you. The thing that's different from women, minority, and veteran-owned is it is a risk, right? So we have a member who it would be great if they were a certified business. We know that we have large corporations that would want to spend with an LGBT-owned business. They are not sure they can take that risk because they might lose other business. Or they're not sure that by being that out, that making their whole life a part of their business plan, that they wouldn't lose business or get harassed. So also to Tim's point, it is wonderful that when you're doing those bios, you say to me, Amanda, I noticed you didn't mention Aaron. Is there a reason why? Would you like to include that you live with your wife in Kent and talk to me about that and bring it along? But if I take that risk to put that out there and maybe all of a sudden I have a drop in clients, or maybe I'm getting some weird emails, or this coworker over here is now being odd with me, you got to be ready to believe me, support me, and help with that.
Great, thank you. All right, I did have one question come through to me in the chat, a simple one. Why do we celebrate Pride in June? Someone is asking. Anybody want to take that?
We don't know. I'm joking.
I know there's a simple answer, but I'll see. I don't know, Tim, let's go to you. Maybe you can provide some insight.
Ooh, I'm not the best history buff here, but, and there, you know, there are cities and countries that celebrate Pride in other months, but here in the States, I think it's generally designed to reflect the Stonewall riots, which occurred at the end of June, which was a time when a LGBT business was being harassed, and the patrons said, we're not going to take it anymore. And then that led to one movement that grew and grew and grew, and it's a time to recognize that. I'm sure I missed out on some big details there. History wasn't the best subject.
I think you
I
covered
teach
it.
marketing and not history.
You nailed it.
All right.
Shout out to Akron. They do celebrate their Pride in August, which is, I think, a nice balance for many in the community. So much gets jammed into June that it's nice when there's other opportunities to celebrate throughout the year. And you'd also notice a lot of southern cities celebrate in the fall. So I think Atlanta just had their Pride in October. Miami, Key West, those very hot places tend to be in the fall season or in early spring.
Yes. All right. Well, we'll keep the Pride celebrations rolling throughout the year. It's wonderful. All right. So let's see here. We've talked a little bit about this already, and a lot of you have touched on this, but I wanted to see if we could just kind of dive into some super specific examples for folks. So how can a business create an environment of inclusivity for the LGBTQ community? So whether we've talked a little bit about making a gender neutral restroom, we've touched a little bit on pronouns, but maybe we could expand a little bit about how that could kind of play out in the business environment. And, you know, even things like at networking events, for example, name tags and including pronouns there or different things like that. So I wonder if we could run through just, again, any very specific examples you might have where you can help to create that environment of inclusivity or expand upon maybe some of the areas that we've already touched on a little bit. So Amanda, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, I mean, we gave really good examples. So I'm trying to think about what's new. One thing that also goes with the employee handbook is your dress codes. If you have dress codes, just make them common sense. Don't say women dress this way and men dress this way. One reason is, so some people identify as both masculine and feminine, or neither masculine and feminine. They might be non-binary or genderqueer. So we don't want to put people in that place. We were working with a construction company, and so they have uniforms. Get a universal size. Get universal sizing, right? Don't have the women's cut and the men's cut. Just get it universal. Also be size aware and size conscious, right? So sometimes there is a tendency that trans men are going to be in smaller sizes and trans women might be in larger sizes. So not only for people who are not slim, right, to be size inclusive, but just think about how easy is it for me to navigate and ask for what I need. If you're doing background checks, it's really important to pay attention that for transgender people, not all of their documentation might line up. And so there's a whole process, right? There's a whole process you have to go about to change your gender markers and your names. And you know, if you're a straight person, you've been married or divorced, that's hard to do anyways. So just add on to it the higher level of discrimination and stress that might go along with that. So you want to have on there, what we usually encourage people to say is, we understand that gender and names might not match up in your background check, something along those lines. We have some specific language and we will hold that in confidentiality. So if I apply and I'm Amanda, but my other information says Alex, I need you to hold that confidentially, right? I need you not to out me as a transgender person, for example. So that's something that's really important to think about. Another thing is with regards to background checks, just paying attention to the ways that sometimes people might be in stressful situations. So going back to what David had said, we have that curve. We have a lot of wealth and then we have no wealth within the LGBTQ community. So people might have been in some stressful situations because of lack of funds. So when those things might show up on a background report, just pay attention to that and have some sensitivity. We always should. Then there's some nuances for us in the LGBTQ community.
Great, thank you. Tim, why don't we go to you? You have any other examples you'd like to throw out there?
I think it's just important to avoid stereotypes. I'm glad that we've had that discussion about finances. There's a perception that certain members of the LGBT community may be more affluent, but we have affluent members, we have members below the poverty line and everywhere in between. So that's an important stereotype to avoid. And just any other notions or perceptions you may have of how a gay man should dress, or how a lesbian dresses, what a transgender person experience. Get to know the actual person. You start to exclude people right away if your attempt at being inclusive is based on a stereotype. While there are nuggets of truth, they're not going to apply to everybody. And that actually gets my guard up when I'm having a conversation with a colleague and they're making an assumption about me because they know that I'm a gay man. I actually get more closed up because of the assumption. I think because it puts us on the defense. And, Amanda's example of being in the Uber and mentioning, my wife usually picks me up. Now that ride home at the end of an exhausting day of flying and traveling has to become like LGBTQ 101 in the backseat of an Uber. And that could really be exhausting to be put on the spot like that at all times. And it adds a lot of stress, which is going to affect my productivity and my relationship with coworkers. So it's a simple issue, but it could really snowball into a problem or not feeling included.
Thank you. Chanel, let's go over to you. Did you have anything you wanted to add?
Yes, I think culture is super important. Being able to know when you walk in the room or when you walk in the door, as Amanda said, you're greeting, how do you greet? But also having employee resource groups, understanding it's a safe space, being able to, I think when you walk in a office space, if I see that people that are out in their space at work, it's one of the things that makes me happy. I feel like, okay, I can be comfortable in, being their ally at all times. I make sure that I'm able to stick up, or if I'm not, familiar with them, introduce myself to them. So I think that it's some of those ways. It's just the employee resource group having a place that they can go and connect. Having that safe space where when you go to HR, you're not kind of worried about what HR is going to say or do. And just the overall culture is when when you walk in a space and they're inclusive and they're diverse and it feels great. And when you're in a space and you're like, I'm not really sure of where to be. And that's, not a good space for any person.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
David, anything else that we've missed or that you want to add?
Sure, yeah. To Chanel's point about employee resource groups, ERGs don't have to be just for big corporations. So I'll give a very specific example of what we do at my organization. So University Circle Inc., our full-time team is about 35 employees. That's not a big organization to have all of these different employee resource groups around veterans or women or the queer community. And so we just have what we call an equity study group. And we basically get together once a month. It's completely optional to opt into it. About 70% of our team does participate on a monthly basis, which is great because it is completely optional. But it's just a space where we can talk about equity from a person of color lens, from a gender lens, from a sexual orientation lens. And we just continue those conversations in the workplace so that we're always kind of setting the tone from a management perspective of how we conduct ourselves internally and externally. You were asking for specifics, and so I was taking some notes trying to think of very specific examples. Lots of specifics on the employee side, so more on the internal business operation side. your healthcare policies. So how you offer healthcare. Are you offering trans-inclusive healthcare? That's a very important aspect where you as a business owner can make an immediate change to help support your employees. Adoption. A lot of organizations offer adoption services or assistance with adoption. Some of those services don't apply equally to same-sex couples as they would to different sex couples, heterosexual couples. And I think that's all I got. There's actually a legal case happening right now around that adoption side, where a couple in Ohio is kind of working its way through the legal system, trying to get a precedent set for equal rights there.
Great, thank you.
Megan,
Yeah, and
can
I'll
I
just,
jump in?
yeah, please.
So just for some of the folks that are tuning in, we're talking about some simple steps, and we're also talking about some big global steps. And those of you who are watching, you personally, each one of you might not have any authority to change the company handbook, and it might not be up to you to replace the signs around the bathrooms, but there are things that you can do, and I hope that that's a takeaway. And then depending on where you are in the organization, you have more power and influence to make some of those larger changes. So everybody who's tuning in, there's a place for you in helping to make the organization more inclusive, really regardless of what your role is and what say you have in how things operate.
Yeah. Yeah, I was going to say, I just want to share a super quick example of something that actually I thought a business did that was very simple that immediately created a welcoming environment for me. But I have a number of tattoos. And so I walked into the tattoo parlor and they had like a laminated sheet with a dry erase marker. And when you walk in, they said, "What's your name and what are your pronouns?" And they wrote it on there and they handed it to the artist so that they knew how to address you, or if they needed to speak, consult with another artist to say, like, she's thinking this, but maybe it should be a little bigger, or, whatever. They knew how to address you. And it was just immediately something that a business did for me as a customer, where I thought, like, okay, they're thinking about this. And that immediately creates an affirming environment for people. So I think there are super simple steps that some of these businesses can take regardless of where you're at the organization. That's a very easy recommendation, regardless of what your role is, that you could make to your boss or to the owner of your business or whatever, of things you could be doing on forms or paperwork or whatever you're having, customers or clients fill out. Just add a spot for pronouns. It just shows that you're thinking about that as an organization, and immediately creates that environment for folks. All right, so I think we talked a lot about kind of talent attraction and retention already, and sort of some of the areas where folks can, if you're thinking about attracting talent, retaining talent from the LGBTQ community. I think we talked a lot about this already. So I won't go too deep into it, but if there are any other recommendations as folks are thinking about the talent attraction retention piece, we know that staffing is certainly, continues to be a bit of an issue for a lot of businesses, small businesses and large businesses included. But are there any other things that we could be keeping in mind as far as, again, attracting folks and then retaining them from the LGBTQ community as a business owner that you could be thinking about? So Amanda, why don't we start with you on that one?
Well, I would be remiss if I didn't mention Plexus has a career board, right? So where are you posting and looking for candidates, and how are you using that network? So our career board is unlimited for our members to post, and we make it only for our members because it's vetted in a certain degree. And so a lot of times I will have people call, especially if it's a larger company, but also a small company, and they'll send me an email, "Hey, I saw this company there. What do you know about them, Amanda?" And I'll be like, "Well, I know Susan and Nolan, and I know these people, and I can't speak to the whole culture, but here's the ways that I see them showing up and engaging with Plexus." Or sometimes I say, "I don't know, they're a new member. Let me give them a call." So we have a career board that's for our members. You can also send jobs over to the LGBT Center. You should also think about this in lots of other ways. What other affinity chambers and business organizations like us exist? The Young Latino Network, the Hispanic Business Center, Amore Consulting has a 100 Latinos you should know and has a job board. Now, the thing is, if you want to post to be able to reach these diverse audiences, we might charge you. Pay it. Right? Like, let us have revenue to support us, because we're out here in the margins trying to bring a lot of people in with us. So pay attention to that. Pay attention to that pay equity in that regard. So that's a really important part with regards to that. And then also internally, how can you have training? So those of you who have taken this opportunity to show up and stream in, wonderful, do that. You know, Chanel at Jumpstart is consulting with numbers, hundreds of entrepreneurs, right? Maybe thousands. I don't want to get into your metrics. But, you know, Chanel and Jumpstart, they brought in a pronouns one-on-one training that we brought, a real quick lunch and learn. Wonderful. Provide those ongoing learning opportunities for your whole staff and individually. Even if you have somebody that can volunteer to say, hey, what I'm going to do is just update the calendar with different cultural, informative and learning opportunities and try and make it as intersectional as possible, because LGBTQ people were in every room. So the more that you work to undo racism or understand the impacts of racism, great. You're getting free. You're getting better to figure out how to like support me as a white lesbian. It's all interconnected. That's one thing I would say really matters.
Great, thank you. Chanel, let's go to you. Anything on the talent attraction or retention piece that you would add?
I'm sorry, my 3-year-old is up, so he's in the background. I would say, you know, I think a lot of points have been hit on. A lot of things have been said, and I kind of agree with all of them. I really don't have anything extra to add, you know, but my biggest thing is culture. And I guess you probably heard it, I sound like a broken record, but I think culture is everything when you're applying for a job. And, you know, no matter whether you're looking for diverse candidates or you are looking as a diverse candidate for a job, you need to be able to know that this is the right fit for you when you go in a space. So
I think that's a great point. Even on your application, what kinds of questions are you asking? Do you have more than just male, female as options for your gender question? Are you asking for people's pronouns as part of their job application? So I think that's a great point.
Yeah.
Tim or David, anything else we haven't touched on yet?
You know, I think in larger organizations, there's often diversity training. And, you know, our webinar is an hour and a half long, but the answer to most of the question is get involved in Plexus, hire Plexus for training, done. Have a good day, everybody. But I think that a lot of times we you know, there could be an annual diversity training, but I think it's also important just to do a temperature check. How are employees feeling with some sort of climate survey? It could be part of a larger employee satisfaction survey where you're just trying to gauge how do employees feel? Do they feel safe? Do they feel comfortable? And keep an eye on that data. Did something change from this past year over the previous period? If so, let's take a closer look at that. So sometimes just asking the employees in a formal way is beneficial. And if it's a smaller organization where it might be challenging to have some sort of satisfaction survey because it's a small group, employee satisfaction is something that, you know, every executive director or small business owner should be mindful of. If you're a nonprofit, you have staff connected to grants. You have staff connected to programs and opportunities that were funded by corporate sponsors. So you really need to make sure that staff are satisfied. And same with a small business, for you to grow, but keep having to fill employee turnover is just going to slow your growth plan. So if you feel you're too small to engage in that type of work, that there are a lot of reasons why you should.
Great, thank you. All right, so let's talk a little bit. We've talked about a lot of ways in which businesses can help to present their business as one that is affirming, welcoming, creates an inclusive environment for both employees and customers. Let's talk a little bit about some of the hesitation that folks might have with regard to some of this. So what advice might you have for businesses who are hesitant to publicly support the LGBTQ community, whether it's on social media or their website, whatever it might be, out of fear that it will be seen as something that is a political statement and will subsequently ostracize folks who may want to patronize their business, but are not necessarily supportive of LGBTQ issues? So Amanda, why don't we start with you on that one?
Yeah, and I'm sure, David, you have a lot of viewpoints here, especially with all the different businesses that you're working with. The way that I answer that is that, LGBTQ people are people. That's what we are, right? Our rights and our access to equal protections absolutely are made political, but that's not what we're talking about. It's not partisan. It's not anything to do with this. We're seeking to support all people. Another way to make the business case is like, why would we purposely neglect to communicate with a key segment of the population? And you can say 1.4 trillion buying power, look at our community, these other things. You have to weigh it out. Just like I have LGBT businesses that aren't ready to come out and make it a part of it because they're afraid of losing that. So find other businesses, reach out to other businesses and nonprofits and say, how are you doing this? What does your messaging sound like? Where's your comfortable middle? How much do you push? How do you respond to pushback? So find your colleagues that are in this space that are doing it really, really well and see what happens for them. Learn the tips of the trade. On social media, just hide the comments. Like if somebody comes in there full blasting homophobia on Monday morning, just hide it. Don't respond. Right? If you know that person well, depending on your community or whatnot, and you want to lean in and have a conversation, love it. That really helps. It's a wonderful part of allyship. When we go and we talk to our people and say, hey, let me talk to you about why this matters to me, about how you and I are similar and why this matters to me, and try and bring that person along. But don't get into a fight on Facebook. Hide those comments. That's what I would say. Some simple things.
David, let's go to you. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, sure. One thing that I like to remind people is I like to kind of give permission to feel that way, right? So if you feel hesitant, it's okay to feel that way. It doesn't make you a crazy homophobic bigot or anything like that. You're talking about your own life and your own business, and that's probably how you support yourself and your family. And so it's okay to have kind of that internal decision process when it comes to making a stand and supporting various communities that you might intersect with in your business. But to Amanda's point, we're talking about humans, and that's really what it comes down to. And you can choose how much you want to engage in that space, or how much you're willing to kind of take from outsiders when it comes to influencing your decisions there.
Thank you. Chanel, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Just to piggyback off of what David just said, as far as choosing, you can choose what you support. So you don't have to go and make it political. You can be very neutral in your commentary, but still show support and still be an ally. So I think it's super important that you choose what you want to say, and be careful. You don't have to go back and forth, as Amanda and David said. You don't have to do any of that. These are your viewpoints, and you do need to sit and kind of go through those feelings to say, is this the right thing that I'm doing for me? But also, I'm I'm an advocate of just saying, just do it. So, go out there, because we are all human beings and we all choose to support things that do become politicized, even when we are not trying to make them politicized. So.
And Tim, anything else you wanted to add?
Just that silence can be pretty loud, right? So if there is a situation and we're, times are somewhat hostile at the moment, I will look for the organizations, the companies that are being vocal and being present. And if your organization isn't there yet and ready to take a stand, to David's point, it's okay to be in that space. You can explore that. And Chanel touched on choosing what you say, but it will make a difference. The organizations that are more supportive will get more support from the LGBT community, period.
Yeah, I will just mention, as a queer identified individual, you might see somebody posting something that is supportive of the community online, and you think wow, that's great. I'm going to go to that business, but maybe you don't go out of your way to comment about it. But I know we have a lot of naysayers who are very quick to, get on their keyboard and go to town. So I think sometimes the naysayers feel very loud, but I think the positive influence that maybe you don't directly see as much is certainly there with regard to people that see things like that and want to support and patronize a business because of it. Amanda, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, I wanted two things. When we're talking about consumers and clients and stuff, we're often thinking about grown-ups. Young people are queer, right? Young people are LGBTQ identified. Increasingly so, our communities are more welcoming. That's wonderful. But still, 1 in 5 young people's teenagers have contemplated suicide. That's like staggering, and it makes my heart hurt. So if a young person is walking into your establishment and they see just the tiniest bit, or they're following you on social media, it can really resonate with them that they're allowed to exist, literally allowed to exist. And I also talked to some elders in the LGBTQ community. October is LGBTQ History Month. And sometimes they say, I didn't even think that we were ever going to have a day, right? That I was going to be able to exist, let alone a history. So these things are like really impactful. You might not know that it could be like life-changing and life-saving, the smallest little thing. The other thing I wanted to say is I'm sure some people, when Tim said silence is loud, so right on. Some people might also be asking about pronouns. Like, people ask me, if I don't share my pronouns in my signature line, will people think that I'm homophobic or I don't like gay people? No. But when you do, one, what it does is it makes our communication more efficient. I'm not having to guess with your name being Tony if you identify as a man or a woman. I'm not having to guess that anyways. But it's just like another way that you can see that names do not give good indicators. So the other thing that it does is when you put your pronouns in or you share it, it does say to me, I'm thinking about this. I'm working to not make assumptions, right? So it doesn't mean that I assume that you aren't down, but when you put it in there, I know that you're down, and that's what you're really trying to look with.
Yeah. Yeah, I see one of our attendees is putting in the chat here, so many young people have commented on our pride flags on our table at vendor and community events that we attend. And you're right, Amanda, it is, the number of Gen Z that is identifying as LGBTQ. I mean, we're looking at 22, 23, approaching 25%. I mean, that's 1 in 5, 1 in 4 people of Gen Z, which is the next up and coming generation identifying. You think about them, you think about their parents. If you're the parent of one of those children, you want to see that you're, patronizing businesses that are affirming to, especially if it's your child, because that really, tends to be where people hold close to their heart. So, all right, well, let's see if we can kind of start to wrap up the discussion here with just a few more areas I'm hoping we can touch on. So first is, let's see if we can talk about organizations or resources. And of course, we've touched on a few, but maybe we could expand on them a little bit, that a small business could engage with, or perhaps look to develop a partnership with if they want to develop or deepen their relationship within the queer community. So whether that's access to just knowledge, getting more information about the community. Amanda, you mentioned job boards, things like that. If you're looking to attract talent or diversify your talent pool, or you just want to learn more or get more connected so that, again, you can find more opportunities and more ways to present your business as affirming and to actually genuinely be affirming to that community. What are some resources, organizations, whether it's here in Northeast Ohio or on a state, national, whatever it is, scale that you might recommend that small businesses look into? So Amanda, why don't we start with you, and you can at least certainly touch on Plexus, but any others that you might want to highlight as well.
Well, I think that y'all know about Plexus, LGBT and Allied Chamber of Commerce, and we're going to give you my email. But here's the other thing that I love about my job. On a monthly basis, we just create a space where we convene all the LGBTQ-led nonprofit organizations that want to show up and just have a meeting. So I have this list, about 30 LGBTQ organizations in Northeast Ohio. So I'm always happy if you want to reach out to me and say we want to have a give back program, or we want to support somebody that's going through adoption or whatnot. I always have those resources available, whether they're Plexus members or they're that LGBTQIA coalition, as we call it. So I always have that. We'll share it gladly. You can email me, whatnot. Also, paying attention to the national organizations like the Transgender Law Center, GLAAD, the Trevor Project, and the Human Rights Campaign is really important. When we're talking about transgender inclusive healthcare benefits, for instance, HRC, they have really good resources to help somebody figure out what does that even mean to have trans inclusive healthcare benefits and how to navigate that from a benefit side of things. Really aimed at corporations, but can probably be distilled for your smaller organizations for sure. And then also it's important to think about our rural communities, right? So Megan's also involved with Lorraine LGBT, right? Yes. And then Lake County also has a small and growing LGBT organization. So in rural communities, it can feel even harder to just be out. because you might not have anybody else that feels like you. You might not be able to feel that you could risk losing your family of origin. That's really important for us to keep in mind. Many of us still lose or have fractured and tense relationships with our family of origin because of living as our full selves. So yeah, I have that list of all the organizations that we're aware of in the area. Happily share that with you, and then also think about your rural LGBT centers or organizations that are out there.
Thank you. David, anything else you wanted to add?
Sure. Supporting Pride events. It's a really low barrier to get involved with your local Pride, whether you're in Cleveland, Akron, Kent has a Pride celebration, Cuyahoga Falls has a Pride celebration. Look for your immediate community if that's where you want to show support. I believe for Akron Pride and for Pride in the CLE that's put on by the LGBT Center of Greater Cleveland, their lowest sponsorship is like $250. And in the big picture, that's not a lot of financial contribution from your business or your organization when it pays back in dividends. Something that's very common that accompanies Pride events is a Pride guide. It's a printed publication. And as a member of the community, I don't want to speak for everyone on the call, but I hold on to that because every single sponsor that's listed, even from the very smallest $100 ad up to the full page ads, those are organizations and businesses I want to support on a routine basis. And so just by reaching out and getting engaged in small things like that can really show your support for the community already in a defined safe space. So it's not as if you need to kind of raise your pride flag on your storefront and kind of be alone on your little island taking a stand for supporting the queer community. You can show that support within the queer community itself, and it kind of insulates you from that negativity. You're not going to get the crazy, keyboard warriors chasing you down when you're just appearing in a Pride guide, but you are going to show that immediate queer community that you are a welcoming and affirming establishment.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. There really are a lot of opportunities if you're trying to capture the LGBTQ community. There are some pretty easy ways to get to them, given Pride celebrations and things like that. Amanda, do you want to add something?
Yeah, I didn't want to forget. So who are you following on social media, and how do you amplify and share those stories and stay connected? And then also we have the Buckeye Flame. Totally forgot, but the Buckeye Flame is Ohio's LGBTQ media source. So they're following everything, good, wonderful, feel-good stories to like what you need to know at a legislative level, because there's actions against us all the time, y'all. So yeah, the Buckeye Flame, I'll make sure I drop their website in there so you can advertise with them, but follow them. Like always just pay attention to what's happening in our communities. Always pay attention to what's happening in communities outside of those that you're a member of is your best way to really be engaged in allyship regularly.
Chanel, let's go to you. Did you have anything else you wanted to add? No? Tim, anything else before we start to wrap up?
Briefly, just another plug for the Buckeye Flame. And when you advertise with queer media, you're just supplying artwork. I'm looking at the homepage of the Buckeye Flame now, and there's an ad for a dentist. And it's the same ad that could be used on cleveland.com or any other publication. It's just about the quality of dental care. So you're not coming up with a separate messaging strategy. You can just reach out through that. If your workplace engages in workplace giving campaigns, I would encourage you to explore a relationship with Greater Cleveland Community Shares. You can get information at communityshares.org, and I could drop their information in the chat. Community Shares has been a longtime supporter of the LGBT community in Greater Cleveland, giving funds to the LGBT Center and other social justice organizations. In fact, that's its mantra. It's a workplace giving federation for organizations that examine and explore and improve quality of life amongst social justice issues in Cleveland. So that's a great way to take a stand and support several organizations at once.
Great, thank you. All right, and with that, I want to wrap up on one final question here, and it's a little bit more of a general one. So I'll touch on each of you and just kind of get your perspective. But at the end of the day, if you could just kind of talk about why is it that diversity makes business better, both from a social or financial perspective? What is it that folks should take away today about diversity, equity, and inclusion that can help make their business better from again, a social or a financial perspective? So Chanel, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. Diversity, equity, and inclusion is key and important when you're looking at as a small business or as a corporation, when you're looking for suppliers. There is so much diversity in that. And usually what happens is people find one supplier and they do business with them forever. But what you find is that there is a financial benefit from actually looking and going with diverse suppliers. It speaks to who you are as a business. It speaks to who you are as a corporation. And from an individual standpoint, when you're a smaller business, it speaks to you as well. So diversity and equity and inclusion is definitely important on that financial and that social standpoint. But financially, we found that, when you work with diverse suppliers, you are actually increasing the amount of revenue that you're bringing in. You're helping overall a community of people and touching a community of people as well.
Great, thank you. David, let's go over to you.
Thanks, Megan. I think this is a little just very straightforward and to the point, but to be frank, you don't see businesses closing because they put up a pride flag. That's not the headline you're going to see in the news. What you do see is businesses closing because they refused to sell services to a certain population, whether that's the queer community, whether that's people of color, whether that's the Jewish community, whatever it might be. Those are the decisions that impact the finances of a business. So becoming an ally, becoming a more vocal ally, very rarely are you going to see a negative return on supporting diversity. To be frank, it's better for your employees, it's better for your consumer base, and it's better for your bottom line.
Great, thank you. Tim, let's go to you.
I'm going to just point out that it's not just LGBT people who care about LGBT inclusion, right? Communities make markets smaller. So there's a ripple effect with the intersectionality within our communities. So if there's a business that's supportive, my parents will support that, my straight parents will support that business. My boyfriend's straight parents will support that business. Our straight siblings, our straight friends, the people of color within the community, within our colleagues, within our friendship circles will want to support that business too. The same is true for a business that either doesn't take a stand or takes an opposing stand. That word can travel fast. So sometimes when we think about LGBT inclusivity, we're just focusing in on LGBT people when the impact will be much greater than our own community.
Great, thank you. Amanda, you want to wrap up for us?
Well, I love that Tim was like, we got a lot of straight people in our families. Like, we're usually like the one or the only, although I do have a friend, like all the siblings are gay. And I was like, what? All four, they're queer in some kind of way. And I was like, that's awesome. Yeah, so we have a lot of straights that we bring with us to things. So pay attention to that. Yeah, we all know that more ideas, different viewpoints, tension and disagreement in those viewpoints creates really much more meaningful, realistic, responsive, and creative content, right? Content, products, services, and services providers. And so especially when we're thinking about it from a nonprofit lens, how are you engaging us, whatever community that we're a part of, to help us solve the issues within our community? A lot of times the problems aren't just within me individually or within my community, but so are the solutions, right? The understanding of why it exists and the way to get around that. So paying attention to that. And then also somebody shared this with me, and I'm sorry, they don't remember who, but like, diversity is inviting me to the dance or inviting somebody to the dance, but equity is letting me DJ or letting me pick the DJ. And doesn't that like really get to it, right? I can be at the dance and I'm like, oh, this is like not my jam. But if you let me play that, and then you have a culture, going back to Chanel, where everybody really leans in and listens and gets curious and tries a new dance move, that's what equity is. And that just makes the party better, just makes the dance so much better.
I want to be at the party where Amanda DJs. That is the party to be at.
That's my next career move.
That's your next career move for sure. All right, well, I want to go ahead and wrap up for today. I'm really excited. We got to touch on everything I was hoping to talk about today. So thank you all so much for your insight, your input, for sharing your personal experiences. I appreciate all of your perspectives. I want to give a quick shout out again to Baldwin Wallace and Cuyahoga Community College. Thank you for your support. I know a lot of folks have been, who can't join us live, have been tuning into our recordings. So we'll make sure that this is available for folks who want to watch it later. For those of you who are live streaming, thank you for joining us and joining as an individual as well. I want to thank all of our amazing panelists today. As long as it's okay with you all, I'd like to share at least a link to your LinkedIn page if folks want to connect with you or have follow-up questions so they can reach out. I will make sure to share that with everybody who's on the call today, as well as those who are registered for the series but couldn't make it to this particular session along with the recording. So with that, unless anybody has any other final comments, we can go ahead and wrap up for this morning.
Have a gay day.
Have a very gay coming out day. Thank y'all. Have a good rest of your day. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.